left for the creatures to devour. But he arrived in time to kill their alpha. They didn't kill her, that would have been merciful. Leonard's wrist bled. Under the weight of rusted iron shackles nailed to a jagged stone pillar, her blue skin was smeared with mud and sweat, her breathing shallow. The evening air carried the scent of approaching rain. And something else, something foul and predatory. She shivered, not from the cooling temperature but from the knowledge of what awaited her in the darkness. She had been left behind. Abandoned by her own people. The elders called it the offering. Their ancient faces had remained impassive as they pronounced her sentence, their decorated staffs tapping rhythmically against the ground. When a mission failed, one was tied for the bonehounds, monstrous beasts with split bear-like skulls, glowing eyes and breath that stank of death. No survivor had ever returned from an offering. The ritual was as old as their settlement, a brutal tradition maintained through generations of fear and superstition. She knew why they chose her to cleanse her failure from their collective memory. She'd disobeyed direct orders during the expedition, ventured beyond the designated perimeter. She'd survived when others hadn't. In their eyes, her continued existence was an aberration, an insult to those who had fallen following protocol. Now she was meat, nothing more than sustenance for the creatures that haunted the outer territories. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had trained her entire life to be a warrior, only to end up as bait. A distant hull pierced the twilight, then another. The bone hounds were coming. Lyre pulled against her restraints one last time, feeling the metal bite deeper into her flesh. Blood trickled down her forearms, joining the dried stains of previous attempts. Her shoulders ached from hours of straining against the inevitable. She closed her eyes, refusing to give into panic. If death was coming, she would face it with dignity, even if no one remained to witness her final moments of courage. Eden moved through the jungle like a ghost with a limp. The old injury from his final mission as a mercenary slowed him down but had taught him patience, a quality that had kept him alive long after others had perished in this unforgiving wilderness. Ex-mercenary, ex-convict, ex-everything. The labels of his past life meant nothing now. Stripped away by years of solitary survival, sweat dripped from his weathered brow as he pushed aside a curtain of luminescent vines. Their faint blue glow illuminated the jagged scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw, a permanent reminder of betrayal. His pack was nearly empty, supplies running dangerously low. He didn't come to help anyone, he came to steal water from a cracked purifier he knew was near the old valley, abandoned after the last territorial dispute. Instead, he found a woman tied to stone. The sight stopped him mid-step. From his vantage point above the small clearing, he could see her clearly, blue skin marking her as one of the indigenous tribe's ceremonial markings, visible even beneath the grime covering her body. Her head hung forward, silver white hair falling in tangled disarray around her face, and near her the bone hounds, 3 of them emerging from the tree and on the opposite side of the clearing, their massive frames casting long shadows in the fading light. Their split skulls, half organic bone, half metallic implants from some forgotten technological age, gleamed dully, eyes like molten copper fixed on their intended prey. Eden instinctively retreated deeper into the foliage. This wasn't his fight. Tribal matters were best left to the tribes themselves. Whatever she had done to earn such a fate was none of his concern, yet he remained watching as the largest beast stepped forward. A memory flashed before him, another clearing, another victim. Years ago, a young man from his mercenary unit captured by rival forces. Eden had watched from the tree and calculating the odds, determining the risk too great, he turned away. That night the screams had carried for miles. Those screams still haunted his dreams. His hand drifted to the scar on his face, a permanent reminder of what followed, his attempt at redemption through self-destruction, the failed mission that had cost him everything. No, not again. The leader of the bonehound stepped forward, twice the size of the others. Half of its jaw was metal, its movements calm, confident. It circled Lonnie, sniffing the air around her, savoring the scent of her fear. The creature's breath came in hot, rancid puffs that made her stomach turn. Its companions hung back, acknowledging the dominance hierarchy that would determine feeding order. Lear's eyes snapped open. She would not die with her eyes closed. The massive creature before her tilted its head almost curiously, as if appreciating her defiance. Its metal jaw clicked inward, a grotesque marriage of nature and technology from an era when such abominations were created for war. A wave of doubt washed over her head. She truly deserved this end. The faces of her fallen comrades flashed before her eyes, their trust in her despite her disagreement with their orders. Had she betrayed them by surviving? Perhaps this punishment was just perhaps the elders were right about her unworthiness. She shook her head slightly, banishing the thoughts. No, she had acted on instinct, on the knowledge that had been ingrained in her since childhood. If that made her worthy of death in their eyes, then so be it. Come then, she whispered, her voiciero but resolute. Finish what they started. The beast reared back, preparing to lunge at her exposed throat. Eden Fink didn't weigh the odds. Something primitive and long buried awakened within him at the sight of her. Courage before he could second-guess himself, he sprinted from cover, grabbed a fallen branch wrapped in old wire, remnants of a border fence, and jumped from the ledge above the clearing. The impact of his landing sent pain shooting through his bad leg, but momentum carried him forward. The Bonehound leader turned at the sound, but too late. The blow hit the beast's neck with every ounce of Eden's strength behind it. The wire-wrapped branch tore into flesh where metal met tissue. It didn't go down, but it staggered, surprised growl erupting from its throat. Seizing the moment of imbalance, Eden dropped the makeshift weapon and grabbed its head, one hand gripping the bone crest, the other the metal plate beneath its jaw. Years of survival had hardened his muscles, but the creature was stronger. It thrashed violently, nearly throwing him off. With a desperate roar, he twisted a snap. In silence, the massive body collapsed, twitching once before going still. The other two Bonehounds froze, their predatory instincts suddenly conflicted by the death of their alpha. Then, as if reaching a decision, they retreated into the undergrowth with threatening growls. Eyes still fixed on the humans, they would return with others. He turned to her. Her blue skin seemed to glow in the dimming light, her eyes violet with flecks of gold. Wide with disbelief, Eden approached cautiously, the fallen branch once again in his hand, ready should the other beasts return. She wasn't crying, she wasn't screaming, she just said, "Why?" A single word loaded with suspicion and confusion. No one interfered with an offering, it simply wasn't done. Eden studied her for a moment before reaching for the shackles. He pulled a thin metal tool from his boot and began working at the lock. "You were breathing," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse, then almost too quietly to hear. He added, "Once I watched someone die when I could have helped. I swore never again." The first shackle fell away, revealing a raw bleeding wrist. She flexed her finger slowly, wincing at the return of the circulation. "And you killed their leader," she said, a note of something like respect in her voice. More growls came from the trees, distant but growing closer. The death of the alpha had been witnessed, and now the pack structure would reorganize violently, and they would be at the center of it. The second shackle opened. Lenore nearly collapsed, her legs weak from hours of standing. Eden caught her arm, steadying her. "Can you run?" he asked roughly. She straightened, pushing away from his support. "Better than you from the looks of it," she replied, eyeing his limp. A hint of a smile touched his lips before vanishing. "Prove it." Running through jungle paths neither trusted, they dodged claws, teeth, thorns, and worse, the bone hounds were not the only predators stalking the borderlands. Phosphorescent fungi clung to ancient tree trunks, providing just enough light to avoid the deadliest obstacles. Somewhere behind them, the furious howls of the pack echoed through the night. Lenore took lead through roots and narrow ledges, her knowledge of the terrain proving invaluable. Despite her ordeal, she moved with the grace of someone born to this unforgiving landscape, occasionally pausing to help Eden navigate particularly treacherous passages. "I know these grounds," she said, breathing hard as they scaled a steep embankment. "I was trained to die here." "You're bad at it," Eden grunted, slashing at vines blocking their path with a knife he'd pulled from his belt. "Good," she replied, a fierce determination hardening her features. "I'm not finished." They paused at the crest of a ridge, the sound of rushing water in the distance providing momentary hope. Lenore pointed toward a CLFT in the rock face ahead. "There's a passage through there, leads to one of the old outposts. If we can reach it before dawn, we might find shelter." Eden nodded, scanning the jungle below for signs of pursuit. "What did you do?" he asked suddenly to earn the offering. Her expression darkened. "I survived when I shouldn't have." Before he could press further, a howl closer now spurred them into motion again. They found ruins from before the collapse, a metal station overrun with fungus and mold. The structure had once been a monitoring outpost, one of dozens scattered throughout the region before the great cataclysm that had reset civilization. Nature had reclaimed most of it, but the core remained intact, its doors sealed against the elements and predators alike. Lenore pressed her palm against a weathered panel beside the entrance. For a moment nothing happened, then with a groan of protest the door slid open halfway before jamming. "Tribal override still works," she murmured, squeezing through the gap, Ed in his broader frame making the passage tight. Inside, dead soldiers, her kind 5 bodies arranged with careful precision against the far wall, their blue skin now ashen in death, ceremonial armor still in place. They had not died in battle. The bodies showed no signs of violence. They had been positioned, their hands folded across their chest, weapons laid at their sides. Lenore froze at the threshold, her breathing suddenly shallow. Her hands trembled as she approached the nearest body, a female warrior with intricate facial markings designating her as a scout leader. "Turun," she whispered. Kneeling beside the fallen warrior, her fingers hovered over but didn't touch the cold blue skin. "I told you, I begged you to listen. Recognize anyone?" Eden asked, moving to secure the door behind them. She nodded, her previously stoic expression cracking to reveal raw pain underneath. I left with them, came back. Alone she stood abruptly, turning away from the bodies, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight. It should have been me there with them if I had just followed orders instead of arguing. Her voice broke. If I had stayed with them instead of turning back when I sensed danger, would they have survived, or would I simply be the sixth body laid out here? The implication hung in the air between them. Somehow she had survived when her comrades had not. A transgression serious enough to warrant the ultimate punishment. What happened to them? Eden asked, examining the bodies from a respectful distance, atmospheric pocket beyond the permitted exploration zone. Her voice struggled to remain flat, clinical, but emotions seeped through the cracks. I told them not to proceed. I sensed something wrong in the air patterns. They were following orders from the elders to push further. She pressed her fist against her chest, where a tribal insignia was partially visible beneath the grime. I abandoned my duty, my loyalty. I chose survival over honor. She turned back to face the bodies, her expression tormented. I was right about the danger. They were wrong to proceed, but I was wrong to leave them. And now I live and they don't. Every breath I take feels stolen from them. Eden's eyes met hers across the dim room. You're not the only one with ghosts. She waited, sensing there was more. He ran a hand over his scarred face, the gesture almost unconscious. I was a mercenary leading a unit on the northern frontier. Good money, simple jobs. His voice grew distant until it wasn't. He moved to the outpost, small viewport looking out at the darkened jungle. My second in command got captured during a routine scout. I calculated the odds of a rescue, decided it wasn't worth the risk to the unit. The words came slowly, painfully. I gave the order to withdraw. What happened? Leonard asked quietly. They kept him alive for 3 days. We heard it all. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the viewport. When I finally went back for him, it was too late. My unit turned on me after that. Can't blame them. He turned back to face her. So when I saw you tied to that post, I couldn't walk away. Not again. Something passed between them, then a recognition of shared burdens of lives defined by survival against impossible odds and the weight of impossible choices. She nodded slowly, acknowledging the unspoken bond. Rest, she said, moving to check the outpost systems. The bone hounds won't breach these walls, not tonight at least. Eden settled against a console, his injured legs stretched before him. He watched as she moved efficiently through the space, her earlier weakness now hidden beneath purposeful action. You have a name? He asked as she returned with a dusty medical kit. Lonnie, she replied, kneeling to examine his leg. You Eden? Well, Eden, she said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. Let's see if we can keep you from becoming another ghost in my collection. Dawn broke with ominous silence, too silent. The jungle's usual chorus of creatures had gone quiet, a warning sign that experienced survivors knew to heed. We need to move, Leonard said, gathering their meager supplies. Something's wrong. Adrian nodded, testing his injured leg. The night's rest had helped, but pain still shot through his thigh with each step. Which way? She paused at the outpost door, scanning the terrain. The settlement lies to the east, but we'd never make it past their patrols. North leads to the Badlands. Poisonous gas pockets like the one that killed my team. Her eyes narrowed. South through the marshlands. It's dangerous, but no one follows fugitives there. Marshlands it is, Eden agreed, gripping a metal rod he'd fashioned into a makeshift staff. They slipped from the outpost into the early morning mist. The jungle grew thicker as they moved south, the ground gradually softening beneath their feet. Massive tree roots arched above stagnant pools of murky water. Strange bulbous plants release clouds of spores as they passed. Watch your step, Leonard warned. The water might look shallow, but there are sinkholes deep enough to swallow a person whole. Chming, Eden muttered, following her careful path across patches of seemingly solid ground. They had been traveling for perhaps 2 hours when the attack came. Not from bone hounds or tribal patrols, but from something far worse, a ripple in a nearby pool was their only warning before a massive serpentine creature lunged from the water. Its head was a nightmare of evolved adaptation, rows of serrated teeth surrounding a circular mouth designed for latching and draining. Bony plates protected its upper body, covered in a film of toxic mucus that glistened in the filtered sunlight. Marsh leech, Lanner shouted, pushing Eden aside as the creature struck. They rolled in opposite directions, the creature's head smashing into the ground between them. Mud and water sprayed as it thrashed, reorienting for another attack. Eden was first to his feet, driving his metal staff into the creature's side. The weapon glanced off the armored plates, the impact reverberating up his arms. The Leech twisted with impossible speed, its tail whipping around to slam into Eden's chest, sending him crashing into a gnarled tree trunk. Lennar seized a fallen branch, jabbing at the creature's eyes. It recoiled momentarily, giving her an opening to reach Eden. "Can you move?" she asked urgently, pulling him to his feet. "I'll manage," he grunted, though blood was already seeping through his shirt where the impact had reopened his wound from the bonehound attack. The leech circled them, its movements calculating as it herded them toward a deceptively placid pool. "It's driving us into a trap." Lennar realized that's not solid ground behind us. Eden's eyes darted around, assessing their options. "On my signal break left, I'll distract it." "Eden, don't," but he was already moving, charging the creature head on. The leech reared back, surprised by the direct attack. Adrian drove his staff directly into its open mouth, momentarily forcing its jaws apart. "Go," he shouted to Lennar. "Now." She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before sprinting left toward a tangle of roots that might offer escape. Behind her she heard a sickening crunch, followed by Eden's cry of pain. Turning back, she saw the leech had clamped down on Eden's arm. His staff was lodged in its mouth, preventing it from getting a full bite, but its teeth had penetrated his flesh. Blood poured from the wound as he struggled to free himself. Without thinking, Lennar snatched up a jagged stone and charged back toward the creature. She drove the stone into the soft underside of its jaw, the one vulnerable spot beneath its armored plates. The leech convulsed its grip on Eden, loosening just enough for him to wrench free, but as he stumbled backward, the ground beneath him gave way. With a startled cry, he plunged into the sinkhole, disappearing beneath the murky water. "Eden!" Lennar dove forward, plunging her arm into the viscous mud. Nothing. Panic surged through her. This human who had saved her when her own people had abandoned her was drowning. The leech, wounded but still dangerous, was already recovering, preparing for another attack. She had a choice. The safe path was clear. The route to solid ground lay just meters away. She could escape, survive, continue the solitary existence that had been her fate since she'd returned alone from the mission. It would be the pragmatic choice, the logical choice. Instead, Lennar took a deep breath and plunged into the sinkhole after Eden. The world beneath the surface was a murky nightmare. Tendrils of some aquatic plant wrapped around her legs as she kicked deeper, eyes burning in the toxic water. Her lungs screamed for air as she groped blindly in the darkness. Her fingers brushed against fabric, then closed around an arm, pulling with all her strength. She dragged Eden's limp form upward, fighting against the mud that seemed determined to claim them both. They broke the surface, gasping, Eden barely conscious, blood still flowing freely from his mangled arm. The leech was circling the edge of the sinkhole, unable to reach them but unwilling to abandon its prey. "Stay with me," Lennar commanded, supporting Eden's weight as she kicked toward a tangle of roots at the edge of the pit. "Don't you dare die now." His eyes fluttered open, foggy with pain. "Should have left me," he mumbled. "Not a chance," she replied, her voice fierce. "My turn to save you." With trembling arms she managed to hoist him onto a thick root that extended over the water. The leech lunged, missing by centimeters as Lonnie scrambled up beside Eden, but they were far from safe. The creature circled below, patient, and Eden's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Blood soaked his entire side now, his face alarmingly pale. Beneath the grime, the puncture wounds on his arm were deep, possibly infected with the leech's toxic saliva. He needed medical attention soon. "We have to move," Lennar said, tearing strips from her already ragged clothing to bind his wounds. "Can you stand?" He tried, collapsing immediately. "Go," he whispered. "You can make it. I'm slowing you down. I left people behind once," she replied, her jaw set with determination. "Never again." With a strength born of desperation, she hoisted Eden onto her shoulders in a modified carry she learned during warrior training. His weight was almost unbearable, but she locked her knees, took a steadying breath, and began to move. Each step was agony. The marsh seemed to fight against them, patches of ground crumbling beneath her feet, vines catching at her ankles, spore clouds making her dizzy and disoriented. The leech had given up pursuit, but other dangers lurked in the shadows between trees. Once a set of glowing eyes watched them from a hollow log. Another time she narrowly avoided stepping on a cluster of pulsating fungi that released clouds of paralytic spores when disturbed. Hours passed. Lennar's world narrowed to the next step, the next breath. Eden had fallen unconscious, his breathing shallow against her neck. The sun climbed to its zenith, then began its descent, casting long shadows across the increasingly treacherous terrain. Her legs trembled, her shoulders burned, every muscle screamed for relief, but she pressed on. There was no one to see her struggle, no one to witness her determination. For perhaps the first time in her life, she was acting purely on her own conviction, following no orders but those of her own conscience. The realization was oddly freeing. If she saved him, it would be because she chose to, not because any elder or commander had deemed it necessary. "We're going to make it," she Told Eden's unconscious form, her voice cracking with exhaustion. I'm not letting you die out here. As dusk approached, the ground began to firm. The marsh was giving way to more stable terrain ahead. A rocky outcropping offered the promise of shelter. With her last reserves of strength, Lenore staggered to the relative safety of the rocks. She laid Eden down as gently as her trembling arms would allow, immediately checking his pulse. Still there, though weak. I got you out, she whispered, collapsing beside him. Your turn to keep breathing. She worked methodically to clean and rebind his wounds, using the last of their medical supplies from the outpost. The marsh leech's bite was worse than she had initially feared. Angry red lines were spreading from the punctures up his arm. Poison, most likely. Lyre closed her eyes, recalling the lessons of her childhood. The plants that healed, the ones that harmed. This was not her territory, but some flora was universal. She forced herself to her feet once more, gathering specific leaves and roots from the surrounding area. Through the night she kept vigil, applying pusses to his wounds, forcing herbal teas between his lips. When he was lucid enough to swallow, by dawn his fever had broken. The red lines had receded somewhat when his eyes finally opened, clear and alert for the first time in a day. She was dozing against the rock wall beside him. You carried me, he said, his voice rough but steady. She didn't ask how he knew. Even unconscious, there was awareness. Yes, she replied simply. Why? She met his gaze, a mirror of their first exchange after he had freed her from the stone pillar. You were breathing, she said, then added with the ghost of a smile, and you'd be really annoying as a ghost. The corner of his mouth twitched upward. Fair enough. Between them passed an unspoken understanding, a debt both owed and paid, a balance restored. They had each seen the other at their most vulnerable, and neither had turned away. Rest, she said, checking his bandages once more. We move when you're stronger. Eden caught her wrist gently. Thank you, he said, the words carrying the weight of all he couldn't express. Lyre nodded once, accepting both his gratitude and the bond it represented. Patrols found them the next day. The hunting party emerged from the jungle as Lyre was helping Eden test his injured arm. 8 warriors, their blue skin adorned with the markings of the central settlement, spears leveled at the unlikely pair. Step away from the human, the lead warrior commanded, his spear aimed at Eden's heart. Lanier moved between them. He saved my life. The patrol leader's expression hardened. You were judged, the sentence was passed, and yet I live, she countered, her stance defiant. Murmurs rippled through the patrol. Her face was met with disgust, with outrage, with confusion. She should have died. She was meant to feed them. The elders will not stand for this defiance. Eden stepped forward, ignoring Lenore's warning glance. She didn't die because I interfered. She killed 2 bone hounds. I killed the third. The lie came easily, a gift to restore some measure of her honor among her people. The patrol exchanged glances, uncertainty evident in their posture. The leader scoffed, a human killing a bone hound? Impossible. Check the clearing, Eden challenged. The alpha lies dead. Its neck broken. Doubt crept into the warrior's eyes. After a tense moment he barked orders to his companions. They bound both Lenore and Eden, though with less hostility than before. The journey to the settlement passed in strained silence, the patrol keeping their distance from the pair as if their survival might be contagious. The settlement rose before them as the sun reached its zenith, a sprawling complex of structures both ancient and new, integrated with the natural landscape. Platforms spiraled around massive tree trunks, bridges connected elevated dwellings, and at the center a grand council chamber carved into the living rock of a cliff face. They were brought directly to the elders, 7 ancient beings seated in a semicircle, their blue skin faded to near white, with age, bodies adorned with elaborate marking denoting wisdom and authority. Their eyes unanimously cold fell upon Lanier with disappointment and on Eden with suspicion. The trial began without preamble. Accusations were made, evidence presented. Lanier stood tall through it all, her silence more powerful than any defense she might have offered. Eden watched, understanding now the full weight of what she had endured, not just the offering but the rejection of her entire society, her crime being right when those in power were wrong, being alive when others had died. As the sun began to set, the verdict seemed inevitable: exile for her, death for him. Until the screams began, the creatures came again, drawn by the scent of blood and fire. The settlement's outer alarm sounded, a deep resonating tone that sent the assembled tribe into immediate action. Warriors raced to defensive positions, civilians sought shelter, and the elders rose as one, their frail bodies suddenly animated with purpose. The bone hounds, one of the elders whispered, fear evident in his voice. They've never come this far before. Outside, chaos erupted. The beasts had come in unprecedented numbers, their rage fueled by the death of their leader. The village walls, designed to repel smaller threats, began to fall under the coordinated assault. In the confusion, Lenore seized her opportunity. She slipped free from her loosely bound restraints, and moved to Eden. Now would be a good time to prove that story about killing. The Alpha, she murmured as she freed him. He rubbed his wrists, a grim smile forming. I wasn't entirely lying together. They fought back to back, mud on their faces, weapons scavenged from fallen defenders. Her movements were precise, trained, a lifetime of discipline evident in every strike. His were brutal, efficient, forged in the crucible of survival amid the chaos. Leonard spotted Vylin, the chief warrior, the one who had personally bound her for the offering. He had been her mentor once before her defiance. Now he fought with 5 warriors at his side, holding a defensive line near the settlement's great hall where the young and elderly had taken shelter. A massive bone hound nearly as large as the Alpha Eden had killed broke through the perimeter. Valen's warriors fell back one by one as the creature advanced. Lyre watched as Valen assessed the situation, saw the exact moment when his eyes shifted from determination to calculation. Without warning, he gave a signal to his remaining warriors and broke formation, leaving a gap in the defensive line. Valen, Lanir shouted, the elders, the children. He met her gaze across the battlefield, his expression cold and resolute. The tribe survives through strength, he called back. The weak are a burden we cannot afford. As he retreated to safer ground, the bonehound surged through the gap directly toward the great hall's entrance, where a young child stood frozen in terror, having wandered from safety. Behind the child, an elderly woman with a walking staff tried desperately to pull the young one back inside. Something inside Lanir shattered the last threads of loyalty to the tribe's brutal hierarchy, to the philosophy that had shaped her since birth. The warrior who had taught her everything about honor was abandoning the defenseless to save himself. Cover me, she yelled to Eden, already sprinting toward the child. She reached the young one just as the bonehound pounced, swinging her scavenged spear in a wide arc that connected with the creature's jaw. The impact sent shock waves up her arms but diverted the beast's momentum. It crashed into the wall beside them, momentarily stunned. Inside now, she ordered, thrusting the child toward the elderly woman. The bonehound recovered quickly, rounding on her with renewed fury. From the corner of her eye, Lanir could see Valen watching from his secured position, making no move to assist the creature. Lunged again. Lanir dodged, but not quickly enough. Claws raked her shoulder, tearing through flesh. She stumbled, fell to one knee. The bonehound circled, preparing for the kill. A roar erupted from behind as Eden charged into the fray, driving a makeshift spear deep into the creature's flank. It whirled on him, jaws snapping inches from his face. Lanir seized the moment, driving her weapon up through the soft underside of the beast's throat. Hot blood cascaded over her arms as the creature convulsed, then collapsed, breathing heavily. She locked eyes with Valen across the courtyard. His expression revealed nothing, no shame, no regret, only the cold calculation of a man who believed survival justified any action. You were my commander, she said, though he was too far to hear. I believed in you. Eden appeared at her side, his own weapon dripping with blood. You're hurt, he observed, eyeing her wounded shoulder. It's nothing, she replied, though the pain was intense. She couldn't tear her gaze from Valen, who had already turned away to direct his warriors elsewhere. That's the one who tied you to the stone, Eden guessed, following her line of sight. Yes, she said, her voice hardening, and just now he left a child to die to save himself. Eden's expression darkened. Some ghosts aren't worth carrying. Her old comrades fell around them. She didn't flinch. There was no time for grief or hesitation. The bone hounds pressed forward, their numbers seemingly endless, their fury palpable. One of the beasts leapt, jaws aimed at Lanir's throat. Eden intercepted it midair with a sharpened shovel, the improvised weapon piercing the creature's chest. The impact drove him backward, the beast's weight bearing him to the ground. Claws rad his side before the creature went still. Blood soaked his shirt, but he staggered back to his feet. Lanir covered him while he bled, her spear keeping the circling predators at bay. Their eyes met briefly in the chaos. An unspoken agreement to see the other through. The battle raged into the night. By dawn the settlement stood, though badly damaged. The surviving bonehounds had retreated, their bloodlust temporarily sodded. Bodies both blue-skinned and bestial littered the ground. Idrin sat on a fallen log as Lanir tended his wounds around them. The tribe began the solemn task of recovery, casting occasional glances their way, some grateful, others still suspicious. They'll want you to stay now, Eden observed quietly as she wrapped a bandage around his torso. A warrior who survived an offering and helped defend the settlement. You've earned your place back. She tied off the bandage with more force than necessary, making him wheeze. And what about you, the human who killed the Alpha Bonehound and fought beside me? He shrugged, immediately regretting the movement as pain lands through his Sighed, I'm still just a trespasser to them, not to me, she replied, her voice firm. After the battle the elders called her marked, the term carried weight beyond its simple meaning, it designated her as someone touched by fate for better or worse. They stood once more in the council chamber, but the dynamic had shifted. The 7 ancient figures regarded Lanner with cautious respect now, and Eden with something approaching acceptance inside. Lanner was far from certain the battle had awakened old doubts. She had watched more of her people die, unable to save them all despite her best efforts. The voices of self-condemnation still whispered, why do you survive when others fall? What makes your life more valuable? She had no answer, only the undeniable reality of her continued existence. You returned, but you brought him, the eldest said, his gnarled finger pointing at Eden. For a moment Lanner hesitated. Would claiming kinship with a human further separate her from her people? Did she even deserve to reclaim her place among them after all that had happened? The safety of belonging beckoned to accept their forgiveness, to rejoin the tribe, to surrender her questioning nature to their collective wisdom. But then she felt Eden shift beside her, solid and real, the only one who had chosen her life over tradition. He saved me twice, Lanner responded, her stance becoming proud but not defiant as she made her choice. A human, another elder interjected the word, carrying centuries of distrust. Lanner's gaze was unwavering. The conflict within her resolved. He broke the neck of the thing you left me to that makes him more kin than any of you. The chamber fell silent at her declaration. No one argued the truth of her words, hung in the air, undeniable even to those who had sentenced her to death. After a long moment the lead elder sighed, his ancient face showing the weight of difficult decisions. Lyre's decision seemed to crystallize in that moment. She looked back at her settlement, the place that had been her home, her entire world. Her tribe had abandoned her to die, and now she had witnessed their most revered warrior abandon the defenseless. The values she had once thought sacred were facades crumbling before her eyes. The council acknowledges your survival as the will of the ancestors. Your place among us is restored. Linear. She shook her head slowly. My place is no longer here. Murmurs arose from the gathered witnesses. To reject reintegration was unprecedented, and the human, the elder asked, his tone carefully neutral. His name is Eden, she corrected, and he goes where I go, or I go where he goes. The distinction matters little. She didn't voice the rest of her thoughts, how she had seen Valen, the honored warrior, abandon a child to save himself, while Eden, a stranger, had risked everything to help her save that same child. How the tribe's proud code of strength and honor had been revealed as hollow when tested. The elders exchanged glances, silent communication passing between them. Finally the leader nodded once. So be it. You are both free to leave or to stay. The choice is yours. Lyre turned to Eden, a question in her eyes. Behind that question lurked doubt, the same uncertainty that had shadowed her since her survival. Did she deserve this second chance, this freedom? The weight of her dead comrade still pressed on her shoulders. How can I leave, she whispered, so only he could hear. After everything, what right do I have to choose my own path when they never will? Eden studied her face for a moment, seeing beyond the warrior's mask to the conflict beneath. Living isn't just surviving, he said quietly, it's honoring those who can't. Every choice you make that they can't, that's how they live on. His eyes flickered to his scarred hands, and sometimes it's about making different choices than you did before, standing when you once walked away. She absorbed his words, letting them settle against the jagged edges of her guilt. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps the greatest dishonor would be to waste the life she had fought so hard to keep. I've been alone long enough, he added simply, her smile tentative at first, then blooming into the first genuine one he had seen, transformed her face. The burden didn't disappear, but for a moment it seemed lighter. So have I. They left at sunrise, not banished, not celebrated, just gone. The tribe gathered to witness their departure, uncertainty evident in their expressions. Some offered gift supplies, weapons, maps of territories beyond their own lands. Others simply watched in silence, perhaps wondering if they would ever see the marked warrior and her human companion again. Lanner accepted the offerings with grace, understanding the gesture for what it was, an acknowledgement, if not quite an apology. Valen stood apart from the others, his arms crossed, his expression impassive. Their eyes met briefly, no words necessary between them. She had seen his true nature, he knew it, and she knew it. At the settlement's edge she paused, looking back at the only home she had ever known. The morning light cast long shadows across the structures, giving them an ethereal quality. For a moment doubt crossed her features. Her hand rose to her throat, fingers finding the tribal amulet that had hung there since her coming of age ceremony. The polished stone pendant carved with the ancient symbols of her lineage and wrapped in intricate metal work had once represented everything she aspired to be: loyal, strong, honorable in the ways her people defined honor. Now it felt like a chain with deliberate slowness she Unclasped the amulet, holding it in her palm. The familiar weight, once comforting, now seemed to represent all the burdens she was leaving behind: the rigid hierarchy, the cruel traditions, the moral compromises made in the name of survival. Eden waited a few paces ahead, giving her the space to reconsider. "Second thoughts?" he asked when he noticed her hesitation. She looked down at the amulet, then back at the settlement where she had been born, trained, betrayed, and nearly sacrificed. "No," she said with quiet certainty, "just memories. Not all of them were bad." With a final glance at the pendant, she let it fall from her fingers. It landed in the mud at her feet with a soft, insignificant sound. She did not bury it or place it carefully. She simply let it drop, leaving it to be reclaimed by the elements just as she had been left. "You could stay," Eden offered, though something in his eyes suggested he hoped she wouldn't. "No," she said, stepping away from the discarded amulet without looking back. "That chapter is finished." She joined him on the path, adjusting the pack on her shoulders. "Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't break your neck killing the next apex predator we encounter." His laugh was unexpected, a rough sound as if long and used fair enough. Two souls walking a path neither asked for, but both now claimed. The journey ahead was uncertain, filled with dangers they could scarcely imagine, but they would face them together. The warrior who had defied death and the outcast who had chosen to save her. She was left as prey, but he came, and the thing that should have devoured her died at his hands. Not all chains are iron. Some are choices, and some are broken with a neck.